The congratulatory email from TechCrunch was still glowing on my laptop screen when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. So proud of Marcus for his breakthrough invention. The whole family is celebrating at dinner tonight. You should come congratulate your brother properly. My hands trembled as I reread the message, then glanced back at the article headline that had just destroyed my world. Local Austin entrepreneur Marcus Thompson revolutionizes cardiac care with groundbreaking pacemaker technology. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The device they were praising, the innovation that would save countless lives, the patent application that had just been approved, every single component had emerged from 2 years of sleepless nights in my garage laboratory. I had sketched the initial designs on napkins during my lunch breaks, refined the circuitry in my cramped apartment kitchen, and tested prototypes until my fingers bled from countless tiny cuts. Yet somehow my brother Marcus had managed to position himself as the brilliant inventor while I remained completely invisible. My name is Claire Thompson, and until 3 months ago, I believed that family loyalty meant everything. I'm a 30-year-old biomedical engineer living in Austin, Texas, where the tech scene buzzes with endless possibilities and the humid air carries dreams of innovation on every breeze. For the past 5 years, I've been the silent co-founder of NovaTech Solutions, a medical device company that my business partner Daniel Rivera and I built from absolutely nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise specializing in life-saving cardiac technologies. Growing up in Cedar Falls, a sleepy town 2 hours northeast of Austin where everyone knows everyone else's business, I learned early that being the quiet, studious younger sister meant fading into the background while my older brother Marcus commanded every room he entered. He possessed that effortless charisma that made adults lean in when he spoke, that magnetic confidence that turned casual conversations into captivated audiences hanging on his every word. Meanwhile, I spent my childhood hunched over circuit boards and programming tutorials, fascinated by the intricate dance of electrons and the elegant logic of well-written code. Our parents Robert and Linda Thompson had always made their preferences crystal clear without ever explicitly stating them. Marcus received the larger bedroom, the newer laptop for college, and the assumption that he would naturally excel at whatever he chose to pursue. When he struggled through his business degree at University of Texas, barely maintaining a C average, they hired expensive tutors and celebrated his eventual graduation as though he had conquered Everest. When I earned my master's degree in biomedical engineering with highest honors while simultaneously working 2 part-time jobs to pay for my education, the family dinner conversation centered on Marcus's new sales job and whether he would finally settle down with his girlfriend Stephanie. The pattern had become so ingrained in our family dynamic that I stopped expecting recognition for my achievements. When Daniel and I secured our first major investor meeting, when we landed our initial government contract, when we moved into our sleek downtown Austin office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake, I shared the news during family phone calls, only to hear polite murmurs followed immediately by excited discussions about Marcus's latest promotion or his weekend golf tournaments. For 3 years, I had been quietly supporting my parents financially while Marcus lived his carefree bachelor lifestyle, spending his weekends at expensive restaurants and planning elaborate vacations with Stephanie. It started innocuously enough when my father suffered a minor heart attack during my second year running NovaTech. The medical bills began arriving with ruthless regularity, each envelope containing numbers that made my mother's voice crack during our increasingly frequent phone conversations about mounting debt and insufficient insurance coverage. "Claire, honey, I hate to ask, but if you could help us with even a small portion of these expenses, it would mean the world to us," my mother had said during one particularly difficult call, her usual strength dissolving into vulnerable uncertainty. "Your father is so worried about the financial burden, and you know how stress affects his condition." Without hesitation, I had transferred $5,000 that same afternoon, telling myself it was temporary assistance during a family crisis. But temporary became monthly when my father's medication costs skyrocketed, when their ancient air conditioning system finally died during a brutal Texas summer, when the roof began leaking and demanded immediate expensive repairs. Every month I sent another payment ranging from $2,000 to $4,000, covering everything from utility bills to grocery expenses while my parents praised Marcus for occasionally treating them to dinner at chain restaurants. The most painful part wasn't the money itself, though watching my savings account shrink while Marcus posted Instagram photos from Cabo stung more than I cared to admit. The real agony came from the complete absence of acknowledgement for my sacrifices. During family gatherings, my parents would mention my computer job in Austin with the same tone they might use to describe someone who filed paperwork for a living, while Marcus's sales achievements earned detailed retellings and genuine pride in their voices. I had convinced myself that my quiet reliability would eventually earn me the respect I craved. That by being the dependable daughter, the one who never asked for anything, and always provided support when needed, I would eventually be seen as an equal contributor to the family rather than a convenient backup plan. Instead, my selflessness had apparently made me so invisible that my own breakthrough invention could be attributed to someone else without anyone questioning the narrative. The pacemaker technology that Marcus was now claiming as his brainchild had consumed every spare moment of my life for the past 18 months. The project began when Daniel brought me a heartbreaking story about his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose outdated pacemaker had malfunctioned during a routine grocery shopping trip, leaving her collapsed in the frozen foods aisle while paramedics struggled to stabilize her failing heart rhythm. As I sat in the hospital waiting room that night, watching Daniel pace anxiously while Mrs. Rodriguez fought for her life, I made a promise that no family would have to endure that terror due to preventable technology failures. Traditional pacemakers, I realized during weeks of intensive research, operated like crude hammers when the human heart required the delicate touch of a master pianist. They delivered generic electrical pulses based on programmed algorithms, completely ignoring the subtle variations in heart rhythm that could indicate impending complications or changing health conditions. What patients desperately needed was an intelligent device capable of learning individual cardiac patterns, predicting potential problems before they became life-threatening, and adjusting its interventions in real time based on continuous physiological feedback. The breakthrough came during a particularly exhausting night in my makeshift laboratory, which had gradually consumed my entire garage until my car remained permanently parked in the driveway. I had been struggling with the miniaturization problem for weeks, trying to pack sophisticated monitoring capabilities into a device small enough to implant safely without compromising the patient's quality of life. The existing technology required bulky components that made patients feel like they carried alien machinery in their chests, constantly aware of the artificial intrusion keeping them alive. While examining the latest prototype under my high-powered microscope, inspiration struck with the clarity of lightning illuminating a dark landscape. Instead of cramming more hardware into the device itself, I could leverage the patient's smartphone as a secondary processing unit, creating a symbiotic relationship between the implanted pacemaker and the personal technology that people already carried everywhere. The implant would handle immediate life-saving functions while continuously streaming data to a companion app that could perform complex analysis, predict potential issues, and even alert emergency contacts or medical professionals when intervention might be necessary. The elegance of the solution took my breath away. Patients would gain unprecedented insight into their own cardiac health through an intuitive smartphone interface, while doctors could monitor multiple patients remotely and receive detailed reports that would revolutionize preventive care. The device would literally learn each individual's unique heart patterns and adapt its responses accordingly, providing personalized treatment that improved over time rather than remaining static like current technology. Developing the prototype required skills I had spent years accumulating through my formal education and countless hours of independent study. The biocompatible materials science, the miniaturized electronics design, the wireless communication protocols, the machine learning algorithms that would enable adaptive responses. Every aspect demanded expertise that Marcus had never demonstrated during his entire academic or professional career. Yet somehow, according to the glowing article that was currently being shared across social media, my brother had single-handedly conceived and developed this revolutionary technology while working his day job selling industrial software to manufacturing companies. The most devastating detail in the article was a quote attributed to Marcus that captured my exact words from a presentation I had delivered to potential investors 6 months earlier. The human heart deserves technology as unique and adaptable as the person whose life it protects, he had apparently told the reporter, using the precise phrase I had coined during countless late-night brainstorming sessions with Daniel. Seeing my passion and dedication reduced to a soundbite in someone else's mouth felt like watching a stranger wear my childhood memories as though they belonged to them. As I sat in my Austin apartment reading about my brother's innovative breakthrough, the familiar ache of invisibility transformed into something harder and more resolute. For 30 years I had accepted being overlooked, dismissed, and taken for granted because I believed that family bonds transcended individual recognition. I had convinced myself that my contributions mattered even when they went unacknowledged, that my sacrifices were meaningful even when they were ignored, that my love was valuable even when it wasn't reciprocated with equal respect. But this crossed a line that I hadn't even realized existed. This wasn't about being forgotten during family celebrations or having my achievements minimized during dinner conversations. Marcus had literally stolen my life's work, the innovation that represented everything I had learned and dreamed and fought to create, and claimed it as his own inspiration. He had taken credit for discoveries that had emerged from my sleepless nights, my failed experiments, my moments of brilliant insight, my careful refinements and endless testing. The worst part was realizing that everyone in my family had automatically believed the narrative without question. Not one person had wondered how Marcus, whose technical expertise barely extended to troubleshooting his laptop, had suddenly developed the biomedical engineering knowledge necessary to create groundbreaking cardiac technology. Not one family member had thought to call and ask if I had any involvement in the project that was making headlines across the medical technology industry.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Their immediate acceptance of Marcus as the brilliant inventor revealed something about their perception of me that cut deeper than any previous dismissal. In their minds, I was so fundamentally incapable of significant achievement that the possibility of my involvement in revolutionary medical technology never even occurred to them. I wasn't just invisible, I was unimaginable as someone whose work could matter on a national scale. As the Texas sunset painted my apartment walls in shades of gold and crimson, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my relationship with my family forever. I was done being the silent supporter, the invisible contributor, the daughter whose value was measured only in her willingness to provide financial assistance while asking nothing in return. It was time for my family to learn exactly who I was and what I had actually accomplished, even if the revelation destroyed the comfortable fiction they had constructed about our relative worth and contributions. The truth would emerge whether they were prepared for it or not, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to demand the recognition I had earned rather than hoping it would eventually be freely given. Marcus had made a catastrophic mistake by stealing credit for work that was legally and professionally documented as mine, and the consequences of his betrayal would soon become impossible for anyone to ignore or dismiss. Tomorrow would bring phone calls that would shatter my family's false narrative forever, but tonight I simply sat with the weight of 30 years of accumulated dismissal, finally crystallizing into unshakable resolve. The quiet, overlooked daughter was about to become impossible to overlook, and the brother who had built his reputation on stolen achievements was about to learn that some thefts carry consequences that no amount of charisma can charm away. The morning after discovering Marcus's theft brought no relief from the churning emotions that had kept me awake until dawn. I arrived at NovaTech's headquarters earlier than usual, hoping that immersing myself in routine work might provide some stability while my personal world felt like it was collapsing. The familiar hum of our laboratory equipment and the gentle buzz of fluorescent lights normally soothed my anxiety, but today even the comforting environment of my professional sanctuary couldn't quiet the storm raging in my chest. Daniel found me hunched over my workstation at 7 in the morning, reviewing technical specifications for a completely different project while my mind wrestled with the devastating reality of my brother's betrayal. My business partner possessed an uncanny ability to read my emotional state even when I thought I was hiding my feelings successfully, and one look at my haggard appearance told him that something significant had shifted overnight. "Claire, you look like you haven't slept in a week," he said gently, settling into the chair beside my desk with 2 steaming cups of coffee from our break room. "What's going on? Did something happen with the Patterson account?" I accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping my fingers around the warm ceramic mug while trying to organize my thoughts into coherent sentences. How could I explain that my entire family had just celebrated my brother for stealing my life's work without sounding like I was having a paranoid breakdown? How could I articulate the crushing weight of realizing that people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had never bothered to understand what I actually did for a living? "Daniel, what would you say if I told you that someone in my family just took credit for our pacemaker technology and is getting national recognition for my invention?" I asked quietly, studying his face for any sign that he might doubt my version of events. His expression shifted from casual concern to sharp focus as he processed my words. "I'd say that person just committed patent fraud and intellectual property theft on a scale that could destroy their entire life," he replied, without hesitation. Claire, please tell me this is a hypothetical question. I pulled up the TechCrunch article on my laptop screen and turned it toward him, watching his face darken as he read the headline, an accompanying photograph of Marcus posing confidently beside a prototype that Daniel had personally helped me assemble in this very laboratory. His jaw tightened with each paragraph, and by the time he finished reading, his usual calm demeanor had transformed into barely controlled fury. "This is impossible," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Marcus has never even set foot in our lab. He doesn't know the difference between a resistor and a capacitor. How the hell did he convince anyone that he developed technology that required years of specialized education and research?" The question exposed the heart of my anguish. Marcus had succeeded in his theft not because he possessed superior intelligence or technical skills, but because everyone automatically assumed that significant achievements must belong to him rather than me. My family's immediate acceptance of his false narrative revealed their fundamental beliefs about our respective capabilities and potential for success. "The worst part isn't even the theft itself," I confessed, surprising myself with the rawness in my voice. "It's realizing that nobody in my family questioned the story for even a second. Not my parents, not my aunts and uncles, not a single person wondered how Marcus suddenly developed the expertise to revolutionize cardiac care. They just automatically believed he was capable of this breakthrough while it never occurred to them that I might be involved." Daniel leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his dark hair as he processed the full scope of the situation. "Claire, you realize that we have documented proof of every stage of development, right? The patent application lists you as the primary inventor. We have video recordings of your presentations to investors, detailed lab notes in your handwriting, prototypes with your fingerprints all over them. Marcus just handed us a slam-dunk case for intellectual property theft." While Daniel was absolutely correct about our legal position, I felt reluctant to immediately pursue formal action against my brother. Despite everything he had done, the thought of sending Marcus to prison or destroying his reputation felt like crossing a line that would permanently sever whatever remained of our family bonds. I had spent 30 years believing that family loyalty required forgiveness and second chances, even when forgiveness felt impossible to summon. "I know we could destroy him legally," I said slowly, "but part of me keeps thinking there has to be another way to handle this. Maybe if I confront him directly, he'll realize how wrong this is and correct the record voluntarily." Daniel's expression suggested that he considered my optimism dangerously naive, but he didn't immediately argue against giving Marcus an opportunity to confess his theft and make amends. "If you want to approach him privately first, I'll support whatever decision you make," he said carefully. "But Claire, you need to understand that people who steal credit for other people's work rarely admit their mistakes voluntarily. Usually they double down and try to discredit the real inventor." His warning proved prophetic, though I wouldn't fully appreciate his insight until later that afternoon, when I finally worked up the courage to call Marcus directly. I had rehearsed the conversation dozens of times in my mind, imagining various scenarios where my brother might express genuine remorse and work with me to correct the false narrative before it spread any further. In my most optimistic fantasies, Marcus would be horrified to learn that his attempt at self-promotion had accidentally resulted in stealing credit for my invention. The phone rang 4 times before Marcus answered with his characteristic confident greeting. "Claire, I was just thinking about calling you. Did you see the article about my breakthrough? Pretty incredible stuff, right? I've been getting calls from reporters all morning." His casual tone, completely devoid of guilt or uncertainty, immediately shattered my naive hopes for an easy resolution. Marcus wasn't accidentally taking credit for my work, he was actively and deliberately claiming ownership of my invention while showing no signs of internal conflict about his deception. "Marcus, we need to talk about that article," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my system. "The pacemaker technology they're writing about isn't your invention. I developed that device over the past 18 months as part of my work at NovaTech." A brief silence stretched between us before Marcus responded with what sounded like genuine confusion. "Claire, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is my project that I've been working on in my spare time. I know you do some kind of computer stuff, but this is advanced medical technology, it's way beyond anything you'd be involved with." The dismissive certainty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't just stealing credit for my work, he genuinely believed that I was incapable of creating anything significant enough to warrant national attention. In his mind, the idea that his little sister could develop revolutionary medical technology was so absurd that he couldn't even consider it as a possibility. Marcus, I'm the co-founder of NovaTech Solutions, I said, my voice growing stronger as anger began to override my hurt feelings. We specialize in cardiac medical devices. The pacemaker you're claiming to have invented was developed in our laboratory, using funding from our investors. I have documentation proving that I'm the primary inventor listed on the patent application. Another pause, longer this time, suggested that Marcus was finally beginning to grasp the seriousness of the situation. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from casual confidence to something approaching concern, though still far from the genuine remorse I had hoped to hear. Look, Claire, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding here, he said carefully. Maybe we worked on similar projects coincidentally, but the device I developed is definitely my own creation. I've got my notes and prototypes to prove it. The blatant lie sent a surge of fury through my system that made my hands shake as I gripped the phone. Marcus was not only refusing to acknowledge his theft, he was now actively lying about having developed his own version of technology that I knew for certain existed nowhere, except in our laboratory. He was doubling down on his deception rather than admitting any wrongdoing. Marcus, stop lying to me, I said sharply. You have never developed any medical technology in your entire life, you work in software sales, and you barely passed your basic science classes in college. Where exactly did you supposedly acquire the biomedical engineering expertise necessary to create an intelligent pacemaker with adaptive monitoring capabilities? His response revealed the depth of his arrogance and his complete disregard for my professional accomplishments.
Claire, just because you can't imagine me succeeding at something doesn't mean I'm lying. Maybe you should focus on your own work instead of trying to take credit for other people's achievements. The conversation ended abruptly when Marcus hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned disbelief. Not only had my brother stolen my life's work, but he had also managed to turn the confrontation around and accuse me of attempting to steal credit from him. His complete lack of shame or acknowledgement suggested that Daniel had been correct about thieves rarely confessing their crimes voluntarily. That evening, I drove the 2 hours from Austin to Cedar Falls, needing to see my parents' reaction when I explained the situation in person. Surely they would recognize the truth when I provided detailed explanations of the technology and my role in developing it. Surely they would realize that Marcus's sudden expertise in biomedical engineering was impossible given his educational background and career history. I found my parents in their familiar positions in the living room, my father reading the newspaper while my mother worked on a crossword puzzle. The house looked exactly as it had during my childhood, filled with comfortable furniture that had been carefully maintained for decades and family photographs that chronicled our lives from infancy through adulthood. The walls displayed Marcus's various sales awards and his college graduation photo, while my advanced degrees and professional achievements remained tucked away in a box somewhere in the garage. Claire, what a wonderful surprise, my mother said, rising from her recliner to embrace me warmly. We weren't expecting you this weekend. Did you come to celebrate Marcus's incredible news? We're so proud of him for developing such important technology. The enthusiasm in her voice when discussing Marcus's supposed achievement contrasted sharply with the polite interest she typically showed when I mentioned my actual professional accomplishments. I had never heard her express such genuine pride when discussing my real innovations or the company I had built from nothing into a major player in the medical technology industry. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you both about Marcus's announcement, I said, settling onto the couch while trying to organize my thoughts. The pacemaker technology that's getting all the attention isn't his invention. I developed that device as part of my work at NovaTech Solutions. My father lowered his newspaper and studied my face with the expression he typically reserved for evaluating potentially exaggerated claims. Claire, honey, are you sure about that? Marcus showed us his prototype last week and he explained the whole development process. It seems like pretty advanced stuff for someone in your field. The casual dismissal of my expertise stung worse than I had anticipated. My father apparently believed that biomedical engineering, the field in which I held advanced degrees and had built a successful career, was somehow less technically demanding than whatever he imagined Marcus had accomplished while working his sales job and maintaining his active social life. Dad, biomedical engineering is exactly my field, I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. I have a master's degree in biomedical engineering from UT. I've been developing medical devices professionally for 8 years. NovaTech Solutions, the company I co-founded, specializes in cardiac technology. This is literally what I do for a living.
My mother's expression suggested that she was beginning to sense the tension in the room, but her response indicated that she was interpreting the conflict as sibling rivalry rather than intellectual property theft. Claire, we know you're smart and good with computers, but maybe you and Marcus were working on similar projects without realizing it. These things happen in technology companies all the time. The suggestion that I might be confused about my own invention, combined with the persistent characterization of my work as good with computers, revealed the fundamental problem underlying my family's reaction. They had never taken the time to understand what I actually did professionally, and their ignorance made it easy for them to dismiss my claims while accepting Marcus's lies without question. I spent the next hour providing detailed explanations of the pacemaker technology, describing the specific innovations that made it revolutionary, and explaining why those advances required years of specialized education and research. I showed them technical diagrams on my phone, patent documentation that listed me as the primary inventor, and photographs of the development process in our laboratory. I explained the funding sources, the investor presentations, and the regulatory approval process that was already underway. Throughout my presentation, my parents listened politely but without the enthusiasm they had shown when discussing Marcus's supposed achievement. When I finished, my father's response encapsulated their fundamental inability to see me as someone capable of significant accomplishment. Claire, I appreciate you explaining all this technical stuff, but Marcus already told us about his invention last week. He brought over his prototype and showed us how it works. Are you absolutely certain that you didn't just work on something similar at your company? The question revealed that Marcus had been planning his theft for at least a week, probably longer. He had prepared my parents for his announcement by showing them one of my actual prototypes which he had somehow obtained without my knowledge. His careful groundwork meant that by the time I arrived to contradict his story, he had already established himself as the credible source while positioning me as the confused sister who might be mistaken about her own work. Dad, Marcus doesn't have access to prototypes of my invention unless he stole them from my laboratory. I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. He has never been involved in medical device development. He doesn't have the education, the experience, or the resources to create the technology he's claiming to have invented. My mother's response demonstrated how effectively Marcus had manipulated the situation to his advantage. Honey, you seem really upset about this, and I think maybe you're not seeing the situation clearly. Marcus has always been innovative and creative. Just because you don't think he could develop something like this doesn't mean he didn't accomplish it through hard work and determination. The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents deflecting every piece of evidence I presented while maintaining their absolute faith in Marcus's integrity and capabilities. No amount of documentation, technical explanation, or logical argument could penetrate their fundamental assumption that Marcus was the legitimate inventor while I was either mistaken or deliberately trying to diminish his achievement. As I drove back to Austin through the darkness, my phone buzzed with messages from extended family members who had seen the article about Marcus's breakthrough. Cousins, aunts, and uncles sent congratulatory texts praising our family for producing such an innovative young man. Several relatives mentioned how proud my parents must be to have raised a son capable of such important contributions to medical science. Not a single message acknowledged my existence or wondered about my potential involvement in the technology that was bringing our family such positive attention. In their minds, I remained the quiet daughter who worked somewhere in the technology industry, completely invisible and irrelevant to any significant achievement that might reflect well on the Thompson family name. The final message of the evening came from my Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, who had always treated me with slightly more respect than the rest of the family. Claire, sweetheart, did you see the amazing article about Marcus? Your family must be over the moon. Has this affected your work at all since you're in a similar field? Even Patricia, who at least acknowledged that I worked in a related industry, assumed that Marcus's achievement was separate from my professional life. The possibility that I might be the actual inventor had occurred to literally no one in my extended family, despite the fact that several relatives knew I had founded a medical technology company. As I finally collapsed into bed after the most emotionally exhausting day of my adult life, I realized that confronting Marcus and my parents had accomplished nothing except confirming the depth of their disrespect for my abilities and achievements. They had chosen to believe his lies rather than accept evidence of my success, revealing that their dismissal of my potential was even more profound than I had previously understood.
The quiet, reliable daughter who had spent years financially supporting the family while asking for nothing in return had been so thoroughly diminished in their perception that they couldn't even imagine her as capable of significant innovation. Tomorrow would require a different approach, one that didn't depend on their willingness to acknowledge the truth voluntarily. The time for gentle confrontation had passed, and the time for consequences was about to begin. The next morning arrived with an urgent email from our patent attorney that changed everything. Sarah Chen, the brilliant intellectual property lawyer who had guided NovaTech through the complex patent application process, had apparently seen the TechCrunch article and immediately recognized the implications for our pending intellectual property rights. Claire, her message began, I need to speak with you immediately about the media coverage surrounding your cardiac monitoring technology. There are serious legal implications that require immediate attention. Please call me as soon as you receive this message, regardless of the time. I dialed her number before I had even finished my first cup of coffee, and Sarah's typically composed voice carried an edge of urgency that I had never heard before. She wasted no time on pleasantries before diving into the heart of the matter. Claire, we have a major problem. The article about Marcus Thompson claiming credit for your pacemaker invention could seriously compromise our patent protection if we don't act immediately. When someone publicly claims to be the inventor of technology that's currently under patent review, it creates legal complications that could invalidate our entire application. The implications hit me like a freight train. Not only had Marcus stolen credit for my life's work, but his public claims could actually destroy the legal protections that would allow NovaTech to commercialize the technology and bring it to patients who desperately needed it. His selfish desire for recognition could literally prevent life-saving medical devices from reaching the market. What exactly does this mean for our patent application? I asked, though I already suspected the answer would be devastating. The Patent Office takes conflicting inventor claims very seriously, Sarah explained. If Marcus continues making public statements about developing this technology, they could halt our application pending an investigation into the true inventorship. That process could take years and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, assuming we can even prove our case definitively. I felt my chest tightening as the full scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. This wasn't just about family dynamics or personal recognition anymore. His lies were threatening to destroy years of research and development that could genuinely save lives. Patients with failing hearts would continue suffering with outdated technology, while lawyers sorted through the mess my brother had created with his fraudulent claims. Sarah, we have extensive documentation proving that I'm the legitimate inventor, I said, though my voice lacked the confidence I was trying to project. Surely that will be enough to resolve any confusion quickly. Documentation helps, but patent disputes involving public claims of inventorship are notoriously complex and expensive to resolve, she replied grimly. The Patent Office doesn't just look at lab notes and prototypes. They investigate the entire development timeline, interview witnesses, examine financial records, and sometimes even require testimony from technical experts who can verify the scientific feasibility of claimed innovations. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes as Sarah outlined the various legal strategies we could pursue to protect our intellectual property rights. Each option carried significant risks and costs, from immediate cease and desist letters that might escalate the conflict publicly to formal patent interference proceedings that could drag on for years, while draining our company's resources. After ending the call, I sat in my office staring out at the Austin skyline while trying to process the magnitude of the situation. Marcus's theft had evolved from a painful family betrayal into an existential threat to everything Daniel and I had built over the past 5 years. Our investors, our employees, our future patients, and our own livelihoods were all now at risk because my brother had decided to claim credit for work he couldn't possibly have accomplished. Daniel arrived at the office an hour later to find me surrounded by patent documents, legal correspondence, and technical specifications spread across every available surface. One look at my expression told him that the situation had deteriorated significantly since our conversation the previous day. How bad is it? He asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the weary resignation of someone preparing for devastating news. Marcus's public claims could invalidate our patent application, I said bluntly. Sarah thinks we need to pursue immediate legal action to protect our intellectual property rights, but that means going to war with my own brother in a very public and expensive legal battle. Daniel was quiet for several minutes, studying the patent documents while considering our limited options. As my business partner, he had every right to demand aggressive legal action to protect the company we had built together. The fact that the threat came from my family member didn't diminish his obligation to safeguard our shared interests and the investments of people who had trusted us with their money. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly," he said finally. "If Marcus were a complete stranger who had stolen our technology and threatened our patent rights, what would you want to do?" The question cut straight to the heart of my internal conflict. If anyone else had committed the same theft and created the same legal risks, I would have demanded immediate and aggressive legal action without hesitation. The fact that the perpetrator was my brother shouldn't change the fundamental equation, but family loyalty made objective decision-making nearly impossible. I'd want to destroy them completely, I admitted. I'd want to make sure they faced serious consequences for trying to steal years of our work and threaten the future of our company. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do," Daniel said with quiet determination. "I understand that Marcus is your brother, but he made a conscious choice to steal our technology and put our entire business at risk. We can't let family relationships prevent us from protecting everything we've built together." The decision to pursue legal action against Marcus felt like crossing a bridge that could never be rebuilt, but I finally understood that he had already burned that bridge with his theft and lies. My loyalty to family had been a one-way street for 30 years, and it was time to start prioritizing the people who actually valued and respected my contributions. We spent the rest of the morning working with Sarah to develop a comprehensive legal strategy. The first step involved filing a formal cease and desist letter demanding that Marcus immediately stop making public claims about inventing technology that belonged to NovaTech. The letter would also require him to issue public corrections acknowledging his false statements and confirming that I was the legitimate inventor. "What happens if he refuses to comply?" I asked Sarah during our strategy session. "Then we file a federal lawsuit for patent fraud, intellectual property theft, and intentional interference with business relationships," she replied. Matter-of-factly, "We'll seek monetary damages, injunctive relief, and potentially criminal referrals for fraud. This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Claire. Patent fraud is a federal crime that can result in serious prison time." The thought of my brother facing criminal charges should have filled me with guilt or regret, but instead, I felt only a cold satisfaction that his actions would finally carry appropriate consequences. For too many years, Marcus had coasted through life, expecting other people to clean up his mistakes and cover for his failures. The time for protection and forgiveness had ended. While Sarah prepared the legal documents, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to stop sending my parents the monthly financial support that had been draining my savings account for years. If they wanted to celebrate Marcus as the family genius, while dismissing my actual achievements, they could also rely on his generosity to cover their expenses. The automatic payment cancellation took less than 5 minutes to complete through my bank's online system, but the psychological impact felt monumental. For the first time in years, I was prioritizing my own financial security and emotional well-being over my family's comfort and expectations. The monthly $4,000 payments would now remain in my account to fund the legal battle that Marcus had forced upon us. Sarah's cease and desist letter was hand-delivered to Marcus's apartment that afternoon by a professional process server who would provide legally admissible testimony about the delivery if needed for future proceedings. The letter gave Marcus 72 hours to issue public corrections and cease all claims about inventing NovaTech's technology before we would file formal legal action. I spent those 3 days in a state of suspended animation, alternating between hope that Marcus would recognize the seriousness of the situation and accept responsibility for his theft, and certainty that his arrogance would prevent him from admitting any wrongdoing. The few text messages I received from family members during this period suggested that Marcus had told them about receiving legal threats from his jealous sister who couldn't accept his success. The 72-hour deadline passed without any response from Marcus or any public corrections to his false claims. In fact, he seemed to be doubling down on his story by scheduling additional media interviews and accepting speaking engagements at technology conferences, where he planned to discuss his breakthrough innovations in cardiac care. On Thursday morning, Sarah filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit against Marcus Thompson for patent fraud, intellectual property theft, tortious interference with business relationships, and unjust enrichment. The complaint included detailed technical evidence proving my role as the legitimate inventor, financial records showing NovaTech's investment in developing the technology, and expert testimony from leading biomedical engineers who confirmed that Marcus lacked the education and experience necessary to create such sophisticated medical devices. The lawsuit became public record immediately upon filing, and within hours legal reporters had picked up the story and begun investigating the dramatic conflict between siblings over revolutionary medical technology. The narrative that emerged painted Marcus as either a delusional fantasist or a calculated fraud who had stolen his sister's life work for personal gain. My phone began ringing incessantly with calls from reporters, family members, and colleagues who had seen the news coverage. I declined all media interviews on Sarah's advice, but the reporters seemed perfectly capable of telling the story, using public records and statements from technical experts who confirmed the implausibility of Marcus's claims. The first family member to call was my mother, her voice shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief. "Claire, how could you do this to your own brother? The whole family is humiliated. Marcus is devastated.
How could you be so vindictive over a simple misunderstanding?" The characterization of Marcus's theft as a simple misunderstanding confirmed that my family still refused to acknowledge the seriousness of his actions or the legitimacy of my claims. Even faced with federal court documents detailing the evidence against him, they continued to frame the conflict as sibling rivalry rather than intellectual property crime. "Mom, this isn't vindictive or a misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "Marcus stole my invention and claimed credit for years of my work. He's threatening the patent rights that protect technology that could save thousands of lives. This is a federal crime, not a family dispute." "But he's your brother," she protested, as though family relationships somehow exempted people from legal consequences for fraud and theft. "Surely you can work this out privately without involving lawyers and destroying his reputation." The conversation revealed the fundamental disconnect between my family's expectations and the reality of the situation Marcus had created. They expected me to absorb his betrayal silently and find some way to resolve the conflict that would allow him to escape consequences while preserving their comfortable fiction about his character and abilities. My father called an hour later with a different approach, attempting to negotiate some kind of compromise that would minimize the family embarrassment while allowing Marcus to maintain his false narrative. "Claire, honey, maybe you and Marcus could say you worked on this project together. That way you both get credit and we can avoid all this legal unpleasantness." The suggestion that I should accept shared credit for my own invention demonstrated how thoroughly my family had internalized the assumption that Marcus deserved recognition regardless of his actual contributions. Even when confronted with indisputable evidence of his theft, they were looking for ways to reward his dishonesty rather than acknowledge the full scope of my individual achievement. "Dad, I'm not going to lie about the development of my own invention to protect Marcus from the consequences of his fraud," I said firmly. "He made the choice to steal my work and claim credit publicly. Now he has to face the legal implications of that choice." The week that followed brought a cascade of media coverage that systematically dismantled Marcus's credibility while highlighting the technical impossibility of his claims. Technology reporters interviewed biomedical engineering professors who confirmed that developing the cardiac monitoring system would require years of specialized education and research experience that Marcus clearly lacked. Financial journalists examined NovaTech's funding records and found extensive documentation of investor presentations where I had personally demonstrated the technology and explained its development timeline. Patent attorneys provided expert commentary on the strength of our intellectual property claims and the serious criminal penalties associated with patent fraud. Most devastating for Marcus was an investigative piece that revealed his complete lack of technical background or relevant work experience. The reporter had obtained his college transcripts showing barely passing grades in basic science courses, interviewed former colleagues who confirmed that his sales job involved no technical development responsibilities, and discovered that he had no laboratory facilities, research funding, or professional relationships that could have supported advanced medical device development. By Friday afternoon, the consensus among legal and technical experts was clear: Marcus Thompson had attempted to steal credit for sophisticated medical technology that he could not possibly have developed independently. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his continued public claims in the face of contrary evidence suggested either profound self-delusion or calculated fraud. The final blow came when a former colleague of Marcus's contacted me directly with information that proved his theft had been carefully planned rather than impulsive. Jennifer Walsh, who worked in the same office building as Marcus, revealed that he had been asking detailed questions about my work for months, supposedly because he was interested in his sister's career.
Marcus kept asking me what I knew about your company and whether you were working on anything important, Jennifer explained during our phone conversation. At the time I thought he was just being a supportive brother, but now I realize he was gathering information to steal your work. He even asked me to help him understand technical terms he could use to sound knowledgeable about medical devices. Her testimony provided the final piece of evidence proving that Marcus's theft had been premeditated rather than opportunistic. He had deliberately researched my work, planned his false narrative, and prepared for months before making his public claims. The betrayal was even more calculated and malicious than I had initially realized. As the week ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about my family relationships and my own worth. The legal battle would continue for months, but the truth had already emerged publicly and decisively. Marcus's reputation was destroyed, my professional achievements were finally receiving recognition, and I had learned that protecting myself didn't require guilt or apology. The quiet, overlooked daughter who had spent decades accepting scraps of attention while providing unconditional support was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood her own value and refused to accept less than the respect she had earned through years of education, innovation, and professional excellence. The consequences of 30 years of accumulated dismissal were about to reshape my family's understanding of who I was and what I had accomplished, whether they were prepared for that revelation or not. 3 weeks after filing the federal lawsuit against Marcus, I received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the chief patent examiner at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and her tone carried the weight of official authority that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. Ms. Thompson, I'm calling regarding your patent application for the adaptive cardiac monitoring system, she began, her words crisp and professional. Due to the public controversy surrounding the inventorship of this technology, we've expedited our review process and completed a comprehensive investigation into the claims made by both parties. I gripped the phone tighter, aware that whatever she was about to tell me would either vindicate years of hard work or potentially destroy my professional reputation if somehow Marcus had managed to fabricate convincing evidence of his involvement in developing the technology. Based on our thorough examination of all submitted documentation, expert testimony, and technical analysis, we can definitively confirm that you are the sole legitimate inventor of the cardiac monitoring technology described in patent application number 17,234,891, Dr. Rodriguez continued. Furthermore, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Marcus Thompson's claims constitute clear patent fraud under federal law. The relief that flooded through my system was so intense that I had to sit down to prevent my knees from buckling. After weeks of uncertainty and legal maneuvering, the highest authority on intellectual property in the United States had officially confirmed what I had known all along: the revolutionary cardiac monitoring system was entirely my creation, and Marcus's claims were not just false but criminally fraudulent. Dr. Rodriguez, what happens now? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be more significant than anything I had dared to hope for during the darkest moments of this ordeal. We'll be issuing a formal statement today, confirming your sole inventorship and noting that any contrary claims are without merit, she explained. Additionally, we're referring Mr. Thompson's case to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution under federal patent fraud statutes. The evidence of his deliberate deception is overwhelming and represents a serious threat to the integrity of our intellectual property system. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes as Dr. Rodriguez outlined the Patent Office's findings and the timeline for finalizing my patent approval. Every detail confirmed the thoroughness of their investigation and the strength of the evidence supporting my claims. Technical experts had verified that the innovations described in my patent application would require exactly the type of specialized knowledge I possessed through my education and professional experience, knowledge that Marcus demonstrably lacked. Within hours of Dr. Rodriguez's call, the Patent Office released their official statement to the media. The language was formal but devastating in its clarity. Following a comprehensive investigation prompted by conflicting public claims, the USPTO has determined that Ms. Claire Thompson is the sole legitimate inventor of the adaptive cardiac monitoring technology described in patent application 17,234,891. Claims to the contrary made by Marcus Thompson have been determined to be fraudulent and have been referred to federal authorities for criminal prosecution. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. Technology reporters who had initially covered Marcus's false claims now focused their attention on the dramatic reversal and the rare instance of the Patent Office publicly calling out fraudulent inventor claims. Legal experts provided commentary on the serious criminal penalties associated with patent fraud, while medical professionals praised the genuine innovation that my technology represented for cardiac care. My phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from major news outlets, but Sarah had advised me to maintain a dignified silence while the legal process unfolded. Let the facts speak for themselves, she counseled. The Patent Office's statement is more powerful than anything you could say in interviews, and staying quiet makes you look professional while Marcus looks increasingly desperate. Her advice proved prescient when Marcus held an impromptu press conference that afternoon, surrounded by the same family members who had dismissed my claims just weeks earlier. The event was a disaster from the moment he began speaking, his nervous energy and defensive tone contrasting sharply with the calm authority of the Patent Office's official statement. "This is all a misunderstanding based on a family dispute," Marcus insisted to the assembled reporters, his voice rising as questions became increasingly pointed. "My sister has always been jealous of my success, and she's using her connections in the tech industry to try to discredit my legitimate work." The reporters weren't buying his narrative, particularly after the Patent Office's unequivocal determination that his claims were fraudulent. When pressed for specifics about his alleged development process, Marcus's answers revealed his complete lack of technical knowledge about the very technology he claimed to have invented. "Can you explain the specific innovations that make your pacemaker design revolutionary?" asked a reporter from IIE Spectrum, the leading publication for electrical engineering professionals. Marcus's response was a rambling collection of buzzwords that demonstrated his fundamental ignorance of cardiac monitoring technology. "Well, it uses advanced algorithms and wireless connectivity to provide better patient outcomes through innovative monitoring capabilities," he said, his face flushing as he realized how hollow his words sounded. The follow-up questions became increasingly technical, and Marcus's inability to provide coherent answers made it clear to anyone with scientific background that he had no understanding of the technology he was claiming to have developed. By the end of the press conference, even sympathetic reporters were struggling to present his claims as credible. The most devastating moment came when a biomedical engineering professor from the University of Texas attended the press conference and asked Marcus to explain the mathematical principles underlying the adaptive monitoring algorithms. "These calculations are fundamental to understanding how the device works," Professor Williams noted. "Any legitimate inventor should be able to explain the basic mathematical concepts." Marcus stared blankly for several seconds before admitting, "I don't think I need to get into the technical details right now. The important thing is that the device saves lives." Professor Williams's expression spoke volumes about the credibility of someone who claimed to have invented sophisticated medical technology but couldn't explain the basic mathematical principles that made it function. The moment was captured by multiple cameras and quickly became a viral symbol of Marcus's fraudulent claims. That evening, I watched the news coverage from my apartment while sipping a glass of wine and finally allowing myself to feel the satisfaction of complete vindication. For 30 years my family had dismissed my capabilities and achievements, but now the highest technical authorities in the country were publicly confirming my expertise and innovation while exposing Marcus's lies. My phone rang as the local news finished their segment on the Patent Office's statement. The caller ID showed my Aunt Patricia's number, and I answered with curiosity about how she would handle the dramatic reversal of the family narrative. "Claire, honey, I owe you the biggest apology of my life," Patricia said immediately, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have known better than to believe Marcus could have developed something so sophisticated. I should have realized that you were the real inventor all along." Her words carried genuine remorse that contrasted sharply with the defensive denial I had been hearing from my parents and other family members. Patricia had always been more perceptive than the rest of the family, and she seemed to understand both the technical impossibility of Marcus's claims and the magnitude of the injustice that had been done to me. "Thank you for saying that, Aunt Patricia," I replied, surprised by how much her acknowledgement meant to me. "It's been incredibly painful to have the family dismiss my work and automatically believe Marcus's lies. I feel terrible about how we treated you," she continued. "I keep thinking about all the times you tried to explain your work and we just nodded politely without really listening. We never took the time to understand what you were actually accomplishing, and that's on us, not you." Our conversation continued for over an hour as Patricia asked detailed questions about my technology and my company for the first time in years. She wanted to understand the development process, the potential impact on patient care, and the business implications of the patent approval. Her genuine interest felt like a revelation after decades of polite indifference from family members. "Claire, I have to ask," Patricia said, near the end of our call, "how did Marcus get access to your prototypes? Because it's clear now that he must have stolen actual devices to show people, since he obviously couldn't have built them himself." The question touched on something that had been bothering me since the beginning of this ordeal. Marcus had somehow obtained physical prototypes to support his false claims, which meant he had either broken into our laboratory or convinced someone with access to provide him with our proprietary technology. "I've been wondering about that too," I admitted. "Daniel and I are working with security consultants to figure out how he got our prototypes. It's a serious breach that we need to understand to prevent future thefts." The security investigation that followed revealed an uncomfortable truth about the extent of Marcus's planning and deception. Security camera footage from our office building showed him entering the facility multiple times over the past 6 months, always during evening hours when the building was nearly empty. He had been using visitor badges obtained by claiming to be my brother who wanted to surprise me with dinner or family visits. The building's security guards, who had seen me working late countless times, had automatically assumed that my brother's visits were legitimate family interactions. They had no way of knowing that Marcus was actually conducting reconnaissance missions to identify our laboratory security measures and plan his theft of prototypes and technical documentation. More disturbing was the discovery that Marcus had befriended several NovaTech employees during his visits, presenting himself as a proud brother who was interested in learning about his sister's important work. He had used these conversations to gather technical information that he later incorporated into his false claims, making his theft even more calculated and predatory than I had initially realized. The revelation that Marcus had been systematically planning his theft for months while maintaining the pretense of family loyalty felt like a final betrayal that severed whatever emotional connection remained between us. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or a moment of poor judgment, it was a carefully orchestrated crime that had required him to lie to my face repeatedly while gathering intelligence for his eventual theft. Daniel's reaction to the security findings was even stronger than mine. "Claire, your brother isn't just a thief," he said grimly, as we reviewed the camera footage in our conference room. "He's a sociopath who spent months manipulating everyone around him to steal our life's work. This level of premeditation and deception is genuinely frightening." The criminal investigation that followed the Patent Office's referral moved quickly once federal prosecutors realized the extent of evidence available to support fraud charges. Marcus's documented visits to our facility, his recorded conversations with employees where he gathered technical information under false pretenses, and his public claims about inventing technology he demonstrably couldn't understand created an overwhelming case for criminal prosecution. 3 days after the Patent Office released their statement, FBI agents arrested Marcus at his apartment on federal charges of patent fraud, wire fraud, and theft of trade secrets. The perp walk footage of my brother being led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about his fraudulent claims provided a stark visual representation of how completely his lies had collapsed. The arrest prompted a new wave of media coverage that examined not just the specific case against Marcus, but the broader implications for intellectual property protection in the technology industry. Legal experts noted that patent fraud cases rarely proceeded to criminal prosecution, making Marcus's arrest a significant precedent for deterring similar thefts in the future. More personally satisfying was the coverage that finally provided detailed recognition of my actual achievements and expertise. Technology reporters interviewed colleagues who confirmed my reputation as a brilliant biomedical engineer, investors who praised my innovative approach to medical device development, and industry experts who explained why my cardiac monitoring technology represented a genuine breakthrough in patient care. For the first time in my professional career, media coverage accurately described my education, experience, and accomplishments rather than dismissing me as someone who worked with computers or did something in tech. The contrast between the detailed recognition of my expertise and the exposure of Marcus's complete lack of qualifications could not have been more stark or more vindicating. The most meaningful recognition came from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the leading cardiac surgeon at Austin Heart Institute, who had been following the development of my technology for potential use with her patients. In an interview with Medical Device Today, she provided the kind of professional validation that I had dreamed of receiving throughout my career. Ms. Thompson's adaptive cardiac monitoring system represents the most significant advancement in pacemaker technology in decades. Chen explained to the reporter. The ability to provide personalized, intelligent monitoring that adapts to individual patient needs could literally save thousands of lives annually. This is exactly the kind of innovation that transforms medical practice and improves patient outcomes. Reading her words while sitting in my office overlooking downtown Austin, I finally understood that the recognition I had been seeking from my family was ultimately less important than the respect I had earned from my professional peers. The people who actually understood my work valued my contributions appropriately, while those who dismissed my achievements revealed more about their own limitations than mine. As the week progressed, the fallout from Marcus's arrest continued to reverberate through my extended family and social networks. Some relatives who had initially celebrated his supposed breakthrough now sent awkward apologies acknowledging that they should have questioned his claims more carefully. Others remained conspicuously silent, apparently unable to process the complete reversal of the narrative they had enthusiastically embraced. My parents, however, continued to struggle with accepting the reality of the situation. Despite the Patent Office's official determination, the FBI's criminal charges, and overwhelming expert testimony about Marcus's lack of qualifications, they seemed unable to abandon their fundamental assumption that he was more capable of significant achievement than I was. The phone call that would finally force them to confront the truth came on a Friday afternoon, when I was reviewing quarterly financial reports in my office. My assistant knocked on my door to announce that my parents had arrived unannounced and were requesting an immediate meeting.
The desperation in their unscheduled visit suggested that the reality of Marcus's situation was finally penetrating their denial. I found them waiting in our reception area, looking older and more fragile than I remembered from our last confrontation. The confident certainty that had characterized their defense of Marcus had been replaced by something approaching bewilderment, as though they were struggling to reconcile the son they thought they knew with the criminal charges he was now facing. The conversation that followed would test whether 30 years of accumulated resentment could be overcome by genuine acknowledgement and remorse, or whether some relationships were too damaged by dismissal and disrespect to ever be fully repaired. My parents sat across from me in NovaTech's conference room, the same space where Daniel and I had celebrated securing our first major investor just 3 years earlier. The polished mahogany table reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed inappropriate for the difficult conversation ahead. My father's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the water glass my assistant had provided, while my mother clutched her purse with the desperate grip of someone clinging to the last remnants of a familiar world that was rapidly disintegrating around her. The silence stretched between us for nearly a full minute before my father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper and completely devoid of the confident authority that had characterized every previous conversation about Marcus's supposed achievements. "Claire, we don't understand what's happening," he began, his confusion so genuine that it was almost heartbreaking to witness. "The lawyers are saying that Marcus could go to prison for 20 years. The FBI agents who came to our house were talking about federal crimes and victims' impact statements. They said you're the victim in this case, but Marcus is our son. How did everything get so complicated?" The question revealed the fundamental disconnect that had plagued our family relationships for decades. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of Marcus's deliberate fraud and theft, my parents were framing the situation as a mysterious complication rather than acknowledging the intentional harm that had been done to me and my company. In their minds, Marcus remained the victim of circumstances beyond his control rather than the perpetrator of calculated crimes. "Dad, it's not complicated," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Marcus stole my invention and claimed credit for years of my work. He broke into my laboratory, took prototypes, gathered confidential information under false pretenses, and then lied to the media about developing technology he couldn't possibly understand. These aren't mysterious complications, they're federal crimes with serious consequences." My mother leaned forward across the table, her eyes pleading for some alternative explanation that would allow their preferred narrative about Marcus to survive the mountain of contrary evidence. "But honey, Marcus showed us the prototypes months ago. He explained how everything worked. If he stole them from you, how could he understand the technology well enough to explain it to us?" The question demonstrated how effectively Marcus had manipulated the situation by using stolen materials and gathered intelligence to create the appearance of legitimate expertise. My parents had no way of knowing that his explanations were simply parroting information he had gathered during his reconnaissance visits to our facility, combined with technical details he had found in the documents he had stolen along with the physical prototypes.
Mom, Marcus memorized explanations from my own documentation and presentations, I explained patiently. He spent months visiting our office under false pretenses, befriending my employees, and gathering information that he could later repeat to make himself sound knowledgeable. The FBI has security camera footage of him coming to our building repeatedly during the planning phase of his theft. The revelation that Marcus's apparent expertise had been entirely fabricated through systematic deception seemed to finally penetrate my father's resistance to accepting the truth. His shoulders sagged as he processed the implications of calculated fraud rather than innocent misunderstanding. "Are you saying that Marcus planned this theft for months?" he asked slowly, as though speaking the words aloud might somehow make them less devastating. "That he deliberately set out to steal your work and lie about it publicly?" "Yes, Dad, that's exactly what I'm saying, and it's exactly what the FBI investigation has proven beyond any reasonable doubt." The conversation continued for another hour, as my parents struggled to reconcile the son they thought they knew with the evidence of systematic fraud and deception. They asked detailed questions about the development timeline, the security breaches, and the legal proceedings that would determine Marcus's fate. Each answer I provided made it increasingly clear that their fundamental assumptions about both of their children had been catastrophically wrong. The most painful moment came when my mother asked about the financial support I had been providing for years, apparently unaware that I had canceled the automatic payments weeks earlier when the full scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. "Claire, sweetheart, we got a notice from the mortgage company about a missed payment," she said hesitantly. "Have you been having financial difficulties with all these legal expenses? We know this situation with Marcus must be costing you a lot of money." The assumption that my financial situation was somehow strained by pursuing justice against someone who had stolen my life's work revealed how completely my parents had misunderstood both the success of my company and the strength of my legal position. They still saw me as the struggling daughter who needed their concern rather than the successful entrepreneur who had been supporting them for years. "Mom, I canceled those payments 3 weeks ago," I said directly. "I've been covering your mortgage, utilities, and medical expenses for over 3 years while Marcus spent his money on vacations and expensive dinners. Since the family considers him the successful one, I figured he could take over the financial responsibilities." The shocked silence that followed my statement suggested that my parents had somehow managed to convince themselves that the monthly payments appearing in their bank account were coming from some other source. Or perhaps they had simply chosen not to think too carefully about where the money originated. The realization that I had been subsidizing their comfortable retirement while receiving no acknowledgement or appreciation seemed to hit them with unexpected force. "Claire, we had no idea you were covering so much of our expenses," my father said quietly. "We thought maybe you were helping with a small portion of the bills, but we didn't realize the extent of your support." The admission revealed another layer of willful blindness that had characterized my family's perception of my contributions. Even when I was literally paying thousands of dollars monthly to maintain their standard of living, they had somehow minimized my role to avoid acknowledging my financial success or their dependence on my generosity. "Dad, you received bank transfers of $4,000 every month for 3 years," I pointed out. "That's almost $150,000 in total support. How exactly did you think I could afford to send that amount if I wasn't successful in my career?" The mathematical reality seemed to finally penetrate the fog of assumptions and rationalizations that had allowed my parents to dismiss my achievements while celebrating Marcus's fraudulent claims. For the first time in our conversation, I saw genuine recognition dawning in their eyes about the scope of my professional success and personal sacrifices. My mother began crying softly as the full implications of the situation became clear to her. "Oh Claire, we've been so wrong about everything. We've been terrible parents to you while celebrating Marcus for accomplishments that weren't even his. How can you ever forgive us?" The question touched the heart of my internal conflict about family relationships and personal boundaries. Part of me wanted to offer immediate forgiveness and work toward rebuilding our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect and acknowledgement. But another part of me, the part that had spent 30 years absorbing dismissal and providing unconditional support without reciprocation, was reluctant to simply return to the old patterns without fundamental changes in how I was valued and treated. "Mom, forgiveness isn't the issue," I said carefully. "The question is whether we can build a relationship based on actually seeing and respecting each other rather than the comfortable assumptions we've all been carrying for decades."
The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion we had ever had about family dynamics, expectations, and the damage that can accumulate over years of systematic dismissal. My parents asked specific questions about my education, my career development, my company's growth, and my professional achievements. For the first time in my adult life, they seemed genuinely interested in understanding who I actually was rather than who they had assumed me to be. "Claire, I realize now that we never really understood what you do for a living," my father admitted with obvious embarrassment. "We kept saying you worked with computers, but we never took the time to learn about biomedical engineering, or what it means to co-found a medical technology company. That's on us, not you." Their acknowledgement felt meaningful, but I found myself hesitant to immediately embrace the possibility of rebuilding our relationships. Too many years of disappointment had taught me to be cautious about promises of change that might evaporate once the immediate crisis passed and old patterns reasserted themselves. "I appreciate you saying that, but I need to see consistent changes in how you interact with me going forward," I told them honestly. "I can't go back to being the invisible daughter who provides support without recognition while Marcus gets credit for everything positive that happens in the family." The mention of Marcus brought a fresh wave of pain to my mother's expression as she grappled with the reality that her preferred child was facing serious criminal charges while her dismissed daughter had been supporting the family financially and achieving genuine professional success. "What's going to happen to Marcus?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer would be devastating. "The federal prosecutors are seeking a 20-year sentence for patent fraud, wire fraud, and theft of trade secrets," I replied matter-of-factly. "His defense attorney is trying to negotiate a plea bargain, but the evidence against him is overwhelming and the Department of Justice wants to make an example of patent fraud cases." The harsh reality of Marcus's situation seemed to finally convince my parents that this wasn't a family dispute that could be resolved through compromise and forgiveness. Their son had committed serious federal crimes that would carry life-altering consequences regardless of family desires or loyalty. As our conversation neared its end, my father made one final attempt to find some middle ground that might minimize the family devastation while preserving whatever relationships could be salvaged. "Claire, is there anything we can do to help with Marcus's legal situation? We know you have resources and connections that might make a difference in how this case is handled." The request revealed that even after hours of honest conversation about the magnitude of Marcus's crimes and their own failures as parents, they were still hoping I would use my success to shield him from the consequences of his actions. The expectation that I should sacrifice my own interests to protect someone who had deliberately stolen my life's work represented exactly the kind of one-sided loyalty that had characterized our family dynamics for decades. "Dad, I'm not going to interfere with the criminal prosecution of someone who stole my intellectual property and threatened my company's future," I said firmly. "Marcus made deliberate choices that hurt me professionally and personally. The consequences he's facing are the direct result of his own actions, not something I'm responsible for fixing." My refusal to rescue Marcus from his self-created legal troubles seemed to mark a turning point in my parents' understanding of how fundamentally our family dynamics needed to change. They were finally beginning to grasp that I would no longer sacrifice my own interests to maintain comfortable illusions about family loyalty and unconditional support. After my parents left that afternoon, I sat alone in my office watching the sunset paint Austin's skyline in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The conversation had been emotionally exhausting but strangely liberating, marking the first time in my adult life that my family had acknowledged my actual achievements and contributions without qualification or comparison to Marcus's supposed accomplishments. 2 weeks later, Marcus accepted a plea bargain that would send him to federal prison for 8 years while requiring him to pay restitution to NovaTech for the damages caused by his theft and fraud. The agreement also included a permanent injunction preventing him from making any future claims about inventing or developing medical technology of any kind. The news of his guilty plea brought a sense of closure to the legal proceedings, but the personal healing process would take much longer. My relationship with my parents had begun to improve through regular phone calls where they asked detailed questions about my work and expressed genuine interest in my professional achievements. The change felt tentative but promising, though I remained cautious about fully trusting their newfound respect after decades of dismissal. More significantly, the ordeal had taught me to value myself independently of family recognition or approval.
The validation I received from professional colleagues, industry experts, and medical professionals who understood my work was more meaningful than any acknowledgement my family could provide. I had learned to find my worth in my own accomplishments rather than in other people's perceptions of those accomplishments. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in federal prison. The handwritten note was brief but represented the first genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing I had ever received from my brother. Claire, I know this apology can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that I finally understand how wrong I was. You achieved everything through your own talent and hard work, while I tried to steal credit for accomplishments I could never have earned myself. I'm sorry for betraying your trust and hurting you so deeply. You deserved better from your family, especially from me. Reading his words in my apartment that evening, I felt something I hadn't expected, a measure of peace about our relationship and its future. Marcus's acknowledgement wouldn't repair the damage he had caused, but it suggested that prison might provide him with the perspective necessary to understand the magnitude of his betrayal and the harm it had inflicted. I wrote back a brief response acknowledging his apology but making clear that rebuilding any kind of relationship would require years of consistent change in his behavior and attitudes. Trust once shattered by calculated deception couldn't be restored through good intentions alone. The technology that had started this entire ordeal was finally approved for commercial production and began changing lives exactly as I had envisioned during those long nights in my garage laboratory. Patients across the country were receiving intelligent cardiac monitoring that adapted to their individual needs, predicting problems before they became life-threatening and providing unprecedented insight into their cardiovascular health. Dr. Elizabeth Chen sent me a photo of Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor whose pacemaker failure had inspired my innovation. She was gardening in her backyard, wearing a huge smile and a t-shirt that read "Powered by Thompson Technology." The image captured everything I had hoped to achieve through my work, transforming medical care in ways that genuinely improved people's lives and restored their confidence in their own bodies. Daniel and I celebrated our patent approval with dinner at Austin's most exclusive restaurant, toasting not just our professional success but the personal growth that had emerged from surviving the most challenging period of our company's history. Our friendship had deepened through the crisis, and our business partnership had proven strong enough to weather even the most devastating personal betrayals. "You know what I admire most about how you handled this situation," Daniel said as we shared a bottle of champagne overlooking Lady Bird Lake. "You never let Marcus's theft make you doubt your own worth or capabilities. A lot of people would have internalized that kind of betrayal and started questioning everything about themselves." His observation made me realize how much I had changed through the ordeal. The quiet, accommodating daughter who had spent decades seeking family approval had been replaced by someone who understood her own value and refused to accept less than the respect she had earned. The transformation wasn't just about standing up to Marcus or setting boundaries with my parents, it was about fundamentally changing how I saw myself and my place in the world. A year later, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Biomedical Engineering Conference, speaking to 3,000 professionals about innovation, integrity, and the importance of protecting intellectual property rights. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of brilliant scientists and engineers who respected my work, I felt a satisfaction that no amount of family approval could have provided. My speech focused on the technical aspects of cardiac monitoring innovation, but I concluded with personal reflections on the importance of valuing your own contributions, regardless of whether others recognize their significance. The most important validation for any innovator comes not from external recognition, but from the knowledge that your work makes a meaningful difference in the world. When we create technology that saves lives, improves patient outcomes, or advances human understanding, the value of that contribution exists independently of whether it receives appropriate acknowledgement. Our responsibility as engineers and scientists is to pursue excellence for its own sake, while also ensuring that credit for our achievements is properly protected and attributed. The standing ovation I received from my professional peers represented the kind of recognition I had dreamed of throughout my career. These were people who understood the technical complexity of my work, who appreciated the innovation it represented, and who valued my contributions based on merit rather than assumptions or family dynamics. As I left the conference that evening, my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother, Claire. "We watched your speech online, and we're so proud of who you've become. Thank you for teaching us what it means to really see and appreciate someone we love." The message represented genuine progress in our relationship, though I remained realistic about the ongoing work required to maintain the changes we had begun. Decades of ingrained patterns don't disappear overnight, and rebuilding family relationships based on mutual respect rather than comfortable assumptions would require consistent effort from everyone involved. More importantly, I had learned that my worth didn't depend on my family's ability to understand or appreciate my achievements. The little girl who had craved parental recognition had grown into a woman who found validation in her own accomplishments and in the respect of people who truly understood her work. The cardiac monitoring technology that Marcus had tried to steal continued changing lives around the world, with medical centers reporting significant improvements in patient outcomes and reductions in emergency interventions. The innovation that had emerged from my late nights in a garage laboratory was now saving thousands of lives annually, exactly as I had envisioned during the darkest moments of Mrs. Rodriguez's medical crisis. That impact mattered more than any family celebration or media recognition could have provided. When terminally ill patients sent me letters describing how my technology had given them extra years with their grandchildren, when cardiac surgeons called to share success stories about procedures that wouldn't have been possible without intelligent monitoring, when medical students wrote requesting internships because they wanted to contribute to life-saving innovation, I understood that I had found my true purpose. The quiet, invisible daughter, who had spent 30 years seeking acknowledgement from people who were incapable of seeing her clearly, had become someone who no longer needed external validation to understand her own worth. The recognition would come, or it wouldn't, but the work itself was reward enough. Marcus would serve his sentence, and hopefully emerge with a better understanding of integrity and the value of honest achievement. My parents would continue learning to see me as I actually was rather than as they had assumed me to be. Our family would slowly rebuild on a foundation of truth rather than comfortable fictions. But regardless of how those relationships evolved, I had learned the most important lesson of all, that real success comes from knowing your own value and refusing to accept less than the respect you've earned through your own efforts. The girl who had once faded into family photos had become a woman who stood confidently in her own light, creating innovations that changed the world and demanding recognition on her own terms. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities for new discoveries, deeper relationships, and continued growth. The woman who had once been invisible had become impossible to overlook, not through demands or drama, but through the quiet power of undeniable achievement and unshakable self-respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.